Proper prior planning prevents piss poor performance. Bella, you need to go on. You need to go somewhere else. Well, what's up guys? This is Daniel from Arms Family Homestead, and in today's video, I'm gonna give you 6 common mistakes that people make when building a fence. What is it, Bear? These dogs are crazy today. So there are a lot of mistakes that people make when they're building a fence, and I just wanna go over a few things that will help you in the future if you're planning on building a fence on your property. So for tip number 1, we might as well start with the ground up, and that is the foundation of your fence. It's just like building a house or something. You've got to have a good foundation, and that on a fence is corner post or stretch post or gate post, line post, whatever you want to call them, but basically the post that the end of your fence is going to be tied onto. The biggest mistake people make is they either undersize the post or they don't go deep enough when they dig their holes. Now there are a couple different schools of thought on setting corner posts. These posts were dug in the ground with an auger and set in concrete. We dig them at a minimum of 36 inches. Now there's a second school of thought that says you can drive those posts into the ground. You're gonna have to go really deep, like say 4 or 5 feet. I haven't done that. We do have some plans in the future to do some stuff like that. But a lot of people will go too small on their corner posts, and I'll show you some things that happen here. We've got several fences around our property, and there's some common mistakes that have been made. So sometimes you do go with the right size post, you just don't go wide enough. And here's an example of when corner posts are put in and there wasn't enough distance in between the 2 posts there. So as you can see, that fence doesn't have a very wide H-brace. So what happened, as you can tell, I mean, I'm kind of standing straight, but you can see over the years, that corner post has pulled. The tension on the fence has pulled it that direction. So what happened here, obviously, was first, 2 things in my opinion. 2 things in my opinion. There's just an H-brace here. There probably should have been another kicker come down at a horizontal angle to the ground. This H is only about 4 feet wide. Probably should have been 7 or 8 feet to the second post, and then another 7 or 8 feet. You put another post in the ground and you do your diagonal, and I think that would have held. And then sometimes, for whatever reason, people decide to just use 1 post. Now I've seen guys build a fence and use like a great big wooden telephone pole, I mean a big post. Now that might hold, but something like this example I'm going to show you over here. So this is a perfect example of what happens when you try to build a fence and you just use 1 post for a stretch post or a corner. Over time, that's going to stretch without that H-brace and that diagonal, or even just the diagonal straight to the ground. If it's a short run, that single post more than likely isn't going to hold. Now if this was a 8 or 10 inch pipe or an 8 or 10 inch wooden post, yeah, you may be able to get away with a single stretch post. But if you're just going to use pipe or small wooden post, you definitely need that H-brace in there, a diagonal, something. It takes more than 1. That's my point. Tip number 2 has to do with choosing the right kind of wire for your fence. You need to know ahead of time what you may be putting inside this fence. Are you gonna be trying to keep Bear in? Because he's a hard one to keep in. No, for real though, are you gonna be having sheep and goats, or are you looking at cattle? You need to know ahead of time. What? Come on, buddy, I'm trying to talk. You know, you need to plan ahead of time. You may have cows on your farm right now, but in the future, really dogs, quit, stop. In the future, you may have sheep and goats or some other small livestock that you, okay. So we can't get on the ground and talk to the camera. You may have other small livestock in the future that, say a 5 or 6 strand barbed wire fence just won't cut it. So there are fences on my property here that are property line fences that were built just to maintain the property line. They were not built to hold sheep or goats or small livestock. So with this pen that we just recently built here, I used sheep and goat wire with 1 strand of barbed wire on the bottom, 1 strand of barbed wire on the top, and the wire itself is 4x4 square, 4x4 inch squares. And this will pretty much hold pretty much any livestock I want to put in it. Sheep, goats, a horse, donkeys, cows. I could probably hold a chicken if I wanted it to. Maybe not baby chicks, but you get the point. And the third common mistake I see is not getting your fence line straight. There are a lot of people that'll build a fence, and instead of setting a corner post anywhere or setting a stretch post where the fence may need to make a curve. I know not every fence line is going to be perfectly straight, but I do know this. In physics, I learned that the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. So if I build a fence and it's got to have a curve in it, or we're going to go down and make a turn, if I don't set a steel post or a wooden post, something solid with a kicker off of it that's going to brace that post, and I tie my wire to the corner here and I tie my wire to the corner here, but I try to make a curve to get to it, well, the straight line is going to go between the shortest distance between the 2 posts that are set in concrete, or my 2 stretch posts. So what you'll see a lot of times, and I'm not talking about people that put a big bow in their fence, that's obviously going to fail. But sometimes you'll see they get their fence a little bit crooked and then the whole fence will lean. Well, usually what's causing the fence to lean is it's not straight. It's not a straight line between the 2 points. They drove all their posts and they didn't pull a perfectly straight line before they did. So if you're driving down the road, next time you're out driving around, just look at all the fences along the line or along the side of the roads. Sometimes you'll see one that's really leaning, and a lot of times people think that's because cows or horses are pushing on it. That's not always the case. Now, they can cause one to lean, but most of the time it's because people put up a fence, they pulled it tight, and that wire found the shortest distance between the 2 points, and the whole fence is trying to lean on them. So make sure you get a nice straight line. It just looks pretty too when you get a good straight fence, but make sure you get a nice straight line if you want your fence to stay standing perfectly straight over the years. Number 4 on the list may be a little bit controversial, and I think a lot of people may disagree with me on this, but in my opinion, one common mistake that I see people make is buying cheap material when they build a fence. You have to look at a fence. There's a good chance you're going to be on this property a long time. You want your livestock to stay in, you want your livestock to stay safe, and you don't want your goats getting out eating your wife's roses or begonias or tulips or whatever you got. You want to keep mama happy. Don't cheap out on the materials. Go out and buy good quality fencing materials, whether it's barbed wire, sheep and goat wire, T-posts. You have to look at that fence as an investment in your property. A cheap fence is going to look cheap, and it's not going to hold up over time. You go out and you save up, spend the money, buy the best materials that you can afford, and that fence is going to last you a lot longer. It's going to look a lot better, and it's going to hold up to the livestock a lot better. Over the years, I've seen people buy really cheap wire, whether it be barbed wire or sheep and goat wire, but really light gauge wire that they can't really stretch very tight, and you come out here and you end up with this. See this fence? It's been here about 30 years. This wasn't super cheap material, but this is not a tight fence. But I've seen people go out and buy cheap material, stretch it, and it looks like this a week later. Do it right. Spend the money the first time, or you'll be spending the money 2 or 3 more times repairing that thing in the future. And we kind of hit on tip number 5 in the last point, and that was wire tightness, getting your wire super tight. When you're pulling and stretching barbed wire, I gave a tip in a previous video, I'll share that with you again. It's very important to take the slack out of that barbed wire or horse wire, whatever kind of wire it is. If it's single strand, 2-strand wire that's woven like barbed wire is, if you just pull it tight once, over time it's gonna sag. It'll sag, I promise you. But you have to go out in the middle of your fence line and walk it back while you still have it on your come along or whatever you're using to stretch your fence. Go pull that wire, just walk backwards with it away from the fence line. And when you let it go and walk back up, you'll see that where it was up here, it's now sagging. You took a lot of the stretch out of it. It's very important to take the stretch out of barbed wire. When it comes to sheep and goat wire, you really have to get this stuff tight. If you don't get that fence tight over time, your goats or cows or whatever it is will come in and push on it, and you'll have a fence that sags. And my last tip for today, tip number 6, has to do with planning. You wouldn't build a house without a plan. You wouldn't build a road without a plan. If you're going to be building fence on your property, in my opinion, it's very important to have a plan. So you're going to want to know, first off, you're going to know where all your underground utilities are. Are there water lines, electric lines? You need to call and schedule someone to come out and mark all of your utility lines, because that's one of those things that could cost you your life if you hit an electric line. So make sure you do that first. Second is planning, like simple things like gates. Plan out ahead of time. If you're building a pen, there's going to be 2 or 3 sides, and to connect to your barn, whatever it is, 4 sides. Put more gates in there than you'll think you need. Sometimes people build a fence and they go, "Dadgummit, I wish I had a gate there." Well, after the fence is built, it's too late. So think about it ahead of time. Draw yourself a little diagram. Draw your property out on a piece of paper. Put where you think you might need gates, and then come back to it a week later and go, "Is that really where I needed the gates, or do I need more gates?" And then when it comes to gates, make sure you plant them wide enough. I've seen people build fences and put a gate in. They'll put an 8-foot gate, an 8-foot wide gate. Well, then a few years down the road, they need to get their tractor inside to put out hay, or they need to get their pickup truck inside to load up a load of firewood, and their gate's not big enough. That's a problem. So go ahead and plan it out. Put you some, small gates. Like for this fence, for this project that we did here down by the barn, I put a small gate that you can't drive through necessarily. You could drive a 4-wheeler or something through it. It's crooked. It looks really crooked. It's basically a wide walk-through gate, so it's like 7 foot wide, something like that. And then up here at the top, I put a gate that's 12 foot wide, so it's plenty wide enough if I need to get in there with a truck and trailer. Say I've got some round bales of hay on a truck and a trailer, I have room to turn in, plenty of width. And then on the other side of the barn, there's also a gate to where the animals can go into the barn, and then I can close it and lock them up. So plan out where your gates are gonna go. Plan out where your utilities are. Plan out what type of livestock you're gonna have in there. Plan, over plan. Think about this stuff ahead of time. When I was growing up, my dad always said, proper prior planning prevents piss poor performance. Sorry, usually keep this pretty G-rated, but that's what I was always taught. Plan ahead of time, plan ahead of time, plan ahead of time. So that's my, pet peeve, I think, on a lot of fencing projects, is people don't plan it out. They just go buy some material and throw up a fence, and then a year later they're like, "Dadgummit, why didn't I put up this kind of fence?" Or "Dadgummit, why didn't I put this fence over here?" Or how about this? They didn't figure out where their property line was, and they're 10 feet across the property line onto their neighbor's property when the next neighbor sells their property, and it gets surveyed, and they go, "Holy cow, our fence isn't in the right spot. We're 10 feet off from where it should be." So plan ahead of time. Remember that. Proper prior planning prevents piss poor performance. Guys, that's all I've got for today. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. Y'all have a great day, and as always, we'll see you on the next video. Just finished a fencing project here on our farm. We're gonna be getting some well, I don't even like that. Go over 6 tips that, well, 6? Nope. Was first 2 things in my opinion. 2 things.